The United Democratic Front is celebrating its 40th anniversary. The organization announced that it would conduct a number of events over the coming weeks to support the development of communities and activists across the country. The National Steering Committee member of the UDF is Popo Molefe, and he joins us now on the line. Mr. Molefe, thank you for making time for us. Now, the UDF's formation, some people argue that it came at the time when there was a vacuum in leadership. When you look at how many leaders, whether from the ANC or other parties, were either in jail or somewhere in exile. Just remind our viewers of the role that the UDF played upon its formation.
Thank you very much, Clement, and once again my sincere apology for the delay in participating in your program. You are aware of the technical hitches that we experienced throughout this morning. To return to your question, Clement, the banning of the mainline liberation organizations, PAC, ANC, South African Communist Party, and the subsequent banning of the Black Consciousness Movement formations, both of which happened, of course, in 1960 and the second wave being 1977, had meant that by and large the voice of the people had been silenced, regardless of the political tendency or the ideologies that were there. But the 1976 uprising ushered in a new spirit of resistance, militancy, and determination to organize and to challenge the system. Thus, we began, therefore, to see emerging grassroots organizations. Of course, they were presaged by the labor organizations, trade union movement that started in 1973 with the dock workers in Durban. But communities began to build civic organizations, residents associations, and new youth formations, advice centers, all of which began to spread like wildfire across the country. Therefore, with the banning of the last wave of banning that affected the Black Consciousness Movement and progressive newspapers like the World, the Post, Weekend Post, and so on, meant that we needed to begin to coordinate all these struggles to make sure that people share their experiences. And it is in that context that the United Democratic Front emerged as a body that was to bring into a broad coalition all of these forces of our people, which were altogether resisting apartheid. Of course, at that time, the apartheid masters, the Nationalist Party, P.W. Botha, having banned our organization, thought that the time was ripe for him and the puppets in the Bantustans to begin to introduce new constitutional reforms which would turn the colored people into, and the Indian people into junior partners in a tricameral parliament. And the black people, of course, hived off to the homeland, those who remained in the urban areas to be under the so-called black local authorities. We resisted that by building campaign structures, whether they be anti-South African Indian Council, the South African Colored People's Council, the anti-PC, anti-presidential committee structures, all of which coalesced into the United Democratic Front. And that then began to create a vehicle that ended that period of a vacuum where people did not have a national voice. We created a national voice through the United Democratic Front. It is now a matter of record that by July 1994, the reforms of PW border lay in ruins. They had collapsed. They had become ineffectual, and the structures created inoperable. That's then the UDF. Of course, you know that many of us were then detained in 1984. Some of us released in December of that year as a result of global campaigns to force them to allow us to have a voice. But by July of the following year, 1985, the struggle had reached such high intensity that again PW border started declaring partial state of emergency, which mainly covered the Eastern Cape, the PWV area, Pretoria, and Val.
Mr. Molefe, and thank you for taking us through that role and the vacuum that the UDF had occupied at the time, the space that it had occupied. What role do you see the organization playing today? Because I think after 1994, you sort of started seeing the organization disappear and disappear. What role do you see the UDF playing today?
Well, the spirit of the UDF, because the UDF doesn't exist as a front, it is the spirit of the UDF, its legacy, its values, its principles that we are reviving. Its role is one of inspiring our people to return to the trenches, to rebuild community-based organizations, advice centers, to begin to get professional bodies to coordinate their activities, to take advantage of the structures that the legislative system in South Africa following 1997 has created to enable participatory democracy, such as your community policing forum, the school governing bodies, as well as the other structures that coordinate rural communities to take up the issues pertaining to the land, coordination of the youth, such as the National Youth Development Council. All of those, coupled with women's organization, can then be again inspired to reassert their rights to reclaim the democratic values which have been systematically disappearing. But above all, I think critical for us in this period is that we should again reconstruct that vision of nationhood, that concept of rainbow nation, which was so pivotal to our liberation movement, which informed our day-to-day conduct in our organization, and was hoped that it would also inform the conduct of government across the three spheres, local, provincial, and national, to make sure that we reflect that non-racial character of the society that we had envisioned, both in the Freedom Charter and in the Declaration of the United Democratic Front. So we're actually calling on the country to go back to the basics, to make sure that we take responsibility to ensure that we defend the democracy that we fought so hard to achieve. That's very important for us. But central to that, as you would know, you would have noticed from the theme of the UDF, active citizenry for transformation and accountability, that we begin a process after commemorating the UDF 40th anniversary of reviving the structures in communities to make sure that anyone who stands and purport to represent the interests of the people becomes accountable to the people and drives the agenda of transformation, and that we, through our structures at local level and all round, demand accountability for the so-called public representatives on what they have done to advance the principles and the values enshrined in the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. So it's a beginning of the charting of a new course, where we now want South Africans to adopt the attitude that says, yes, you can go there, we will participate to vote, but you will not have a blank check from us. You will get our vote only to the extent that what you stand for represents the aspirations of the ordinary people in South Africa, and you don't only speak, but you walk the talk. That's what we want to say. So in a sense, there will be no more blank check for public representatives. We would obviously say, in order for our people to claim the democracy that they fought for, the young people and many others who have not registered to vote must be encouraged to vote, because in a constitutional democracy, the only way in which they can assert their power is when they use the instruments of democracy that we have created to ensure that they turn this country into one where the people govern, not one where political parties or politicians govern, but one envisaged in the Freedom Charter and in our Constitution, that the ordinary people shall determine the direction that the country takes. It's going to be difficult, it's not going to be easy, but it is important that all of us begin to do that way. We've got to move away from seeing every little organization as a conduit of enriching ourselves. That we must stop having political arrangements in South Africa being bargaining centers where individuals and politicians bargain amongst themselves for power and thus promoting their own interests. We must stop that kind of an arrangement and make sure that indeed anybody who gets into office, anyone who's incompetent, anyone who's corrupt would not find a way into the public office across the sphere of government.
We've got to leave it there. Thank you for making time for us. Popo Molefe is the National Steering Committee member for the UDF.